wasting much time, I just introduce and thank you from my bottom of my heart, and wishing everyone a great and great time actually. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very well, welcome you all.
लास्ट में से एंडिंग करवा दूंगी मैं।
Those two nations, Kenya and India. And Aruna, I think, have translated everything in the world. So he knows all the nation. I know only Odisha and that, not very well.
अरे सर रह गया।
Talk about one nation, many voices, and the role of it. So, I think I should begin with the first. Okay, I think we should begin with thank you, Bank of America. Rescue of our predicament.
So what?
One nation, many voices. What role literature can play in silencing those voices or amplifying?
See, literature is, I look at literature really in two formats, one as a mirror and one as a bridge. As a mirror, literature can, amplify certain voices within society which do not get that much play. For instance, it can talk about the ills of society. It can shine a spotlight on some practices in society, for instance. Basically holding a mirror to our own faces, that this is what your society is like. And, the thing about literature is, it is not a reproduction of reality. It is a recreation of reality. And when you recreate reality, the writer brings his or her own personal truth to that recreation. But through that truth, the idea is to, let society have a look, either critically or positively on certain aspects. So that's literature as a mirror. And the second aspect is literature as a bridge. And I did not really understand this till I went on my first book tour in Australia. Having written Q&A, I was on my first book tour in Australia in 2005. And an Australian woman walks up to me in Adelaide and says, "Mr. Swaroop, your book gave us such a window into Indian culture." And I was frankly zapped to hear that, because when I was writing this book, the last thing I expected was that I'm giving somebody a window into Indian culture. I thought I was writing as an insider for insiders. This is not the exotic India. I was not writing about palaces and yogas and maharajas. I was writing about the underbelly of urban India. So I thought this is a book that only Indians would be able to understand and relate to, because, there was no attempt to sort of, what should I say, not use Hindi idioms and things like that in the interest of a foreign audience understanding it or not. So that's what made me realize that when a foreigner picks up a book by a writer from another country, then there are two ways. One, of course, the reader likes the writer's style or whatever, but also the reader is trying to get an insight into that writer's country and culture. When I'm picking up a book by a Colombian writer, probably at the back of my mind is also that maybe I'll understand Colombian society better. So that is where I think literature plays a very important role as a bridge between societies. And I think that is a very important role, because, we make sense of our world through the stories we tell ourselves and the story we hear from others. Without that function of literature, I think the world would be a very dreary place. I think it's only because of I joined the Foreign Service entirely because of the world literature I had read, and which made me curious about, what is a scone and what is the Blandings Castle and things like that. And that really made me interested in trying to explore that world which I had read about. So I'll stop there, but I think for me, no, I think others should also have a chance.
So would you take this? Huh? Would you like to? Yeah.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. We had a very enlightening session with Shoykot here. It was fantastic, very learning, a really learning experience. So I have been a literature student, And, as a student, of course, we were taught things rather differently. While writing, I exercise a lot, many more liberties than what we were not allowed to do as a student. You know, I have written 4 books, and all 4 of them are historical fiction. Well, two are historical fiction and 2 non-fiction. Literature, for me, like my father used to tell me when I was young, he used to talk about some country, and I used to say, "Oh, you visited?" He said, "No, I don't need to. There are books." So you can visit the whole world, firstly, by reading books. I have learned a lot about Russia, particularly, for instance, reading all those fantastic Russian novelists. I'm a great fan of Russian novelists. And it is not only about geography, about countries. It's across time and space. It is across generations, millennia, that we have understood, or rather, I would say, relate to certain eras which we have only read through literature. So, I have not been a history student, but while researching for my books, which is another extremely interesting facet about writing, I think, is our research, I have learned much more about history, or nations or people or events, than our history books have taught us. So that is a different kind of a take about literature. Historical fiction or historical non-fiction, I think, gives you a very different perspective, a very different glimpse into history that we have been kept away from. And again, like POV is a very, I think, point of view of the writer is very, very important, because, and it is also very important both as a writer or a student of literature to, analyze all the points of view. And just because I am a right-wing, follower, doesn't mean that I should read and stick to only right-wing books that are written, which sort of complement right-wing politics. I should also read the other side of, thoughts, and that again would come to me through books and through literature. So I feel that while writing my historical books, I learned much more about history. Now, there is my first book, incidentally, was about, for young adults, It's called Khoka. It's a compilation of short stories that my father told me about his childhood during the 1930s and 40s, just before our independence. We are originally from Dhaka, but my father grew up in Jharkhand, what is today Jharkhand, in Giridih and Hazaribagh. And 2-3 very important aspects he brought out, which I've written about in the book, which I had no clue about. One is that Sir Jagdish Chandra Bose died in Giridih, and how the government of India had organized a special train to bring all those people who wanted to get a last, take a last look at him, or come and pay their respects. And the second thing he told me, other than all the adventure stories, of course, I learned so much about the geography of that place. I haven't been there, but I learned so much about geography. But the second very important thing he told me was that at that time, Netaji's speeches were banned all over India, and there were certain households which had radio sets, and they would attach those radio sets to the car headlights and get them operational. And the elders of the house would get together surreptitiously and listen to all these speeches from Saigon, from Berlin, and the children. This is from the point of view of the children that I've written. They would wonder what's happened suddenly, in the house, that, all these elders have finished their chores and have got together, and what is that? And then they heard Netaji's voice. Now, when a child today, Khoka has done, I must say, I'm very happy to say that it's been translated into Hindi, and it's come out with about 3-4 reprints and 2 editions. So because it is, a child sitting in the Northeast, or a child sitting in South India, or even in Jammu and Kashmir, can have an idea about what the common man or the child of that time was thinking when all these big events and these big personalities were sort of dominating the scene. What was happening at the common man's level. So this, I think, is where literature is very, very important and plays a very significant role.
So talking of bridges brings me to Aruna, because he has built the maximum number of bridges through his translation. But I wish he had really built real bridges. Then he would be the richest friend we have, and we could have all joined his office and get more money than Ashoka can give Saikat. But all right, he just built 5 bridges last month. I think Buddhadev Basu's 5 novels he translated. So I always think that he should have built the greatest contractor in history. But well, he chose to do less remunerative jobs. Fine, but now I think he should talk about bridge building from his point of view, which is an extremely enriching point of view.
You want me to talk about uncivil engineering?
Non-civil engineering. But I wish you were a civil engineer.
Yeah. No, I didn't do 5 books in a month. Those are reprints. But
Oh, reprints.
yes. No, that's not possible. No, but I'm reminded of what Shishir Das, the great academic, said, and he contested the idea of Indian literature. And he said there is no Indian literature. There are the literatures of India. And the worry, as in your case, Vikas, is this idea of reading a book and thinking this reflects the country. First of all, what is the country? The country is not a unique entity. India is as diverse as any continent in the world. And to say it's this one thing or this 2 things and so on is to do a huge disservice to the idea of richness that we have here. So I'm very interested in all the different literatures of India and having each of us getting to know one another through our literatures. We run the risk of being confined to islands increasingly because we are not strictly speaking biliterate or triliterate anymore. We are bilingual in some ways. We can talk, but we hardly ever read in another language of India. At most, we'll read in English alongside our own mother tongue. And we increasingly, the distance between people in various parts of the country in terms of a real understanding of one another is growing. What is common to us is achieved by the Macworldization, the McDonaldization, where everything is supposed to be similar. You get the same burger everywhere. So this whole idea that everything must be identical to make a country, but that's not how you can make India. You can make India by actually acknowledging that it is a patchwork. And this is where all the different literatures of India have a huge role to play. And, it always strikes me that what is the one entity that survives through centuries? It's not politicians. It's not it's not even bridges. It's actually only words, books, literature, right? So
Not even cinema, I think.
not even cinema.
Because that is again limited to a certain time frame.
Yeah. So, and we read the poets of the ancient years, and people in the future will continue to read what is being written in our time. So this is why literature will remain as the true voice of the people. And at the risk of repeating myself, literature is the language of democracy in India. That is how everybody can have a voice. Without it, not everybody is going to be able to speak. So I just hope that the trend that we are noticing of people reading less is reversed in some way. I'm not sure what. Maybe it is the right form of literature waiting to find the right kind of reader, or something else. I don't have an answer. But I think every imminent collapse leads to something new coming up. So I'm very excited to see what the next form of literature will be in our country.
I think Sukrita, Nation and Many Voices.
I think, Arunava, what you've said, I was thinking of saying, but let me just add on to that. See, when I have to go back to my being suspended in 2 worlds, right? And it was a very normal kind of coming to my own, kind of personal life. It was the trajectory was, okay, you do your BA English honors, and then you do your MA English literature, then in my time, PhD in American fiction. Because after that, I was going to go abroad, which was going to be American literature, specializing in that, not realizing that the Americans don't need to learn American literature, but they want to know Indian literature right now anyway. So that apart, it was very late in life, and I'd come back to India after my schooling. And I realized immediately after my PhD that there was something false about what I was doing. And therefore, I mean, thanks to my parents who were making great efforts for me to get to know how to read Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi. These are the three languages in which I was operating within the home, grandmother, etc., and my neighbors and Marathi. I came and stayed in Maharashtra for a while. Now, it was at that point of time that I realized I needed to do Indian literatures, Indian in plural. And why? Because my father was a writer, my mother was a translator, and my grandmother used to give me tales in Punjabi, right? So all these languages, and each one unto itself had a world which was very diverse from the other, very different from the other. And when I worked out a kind of a project for myself, which was postdoctoral project, and I wanted to do Indian literature, Delhi University did not give me leave. Why? Because they said, you want to work on Hindi and Urdu when you are an English professor, right? Or going to be a professor. I think I was just. So, I mean, now it's very different. Times are very different. But at that time, I was not being given. So I, with a vengeance, started working in Hindi and Urdu and started to work in the area of trying to understand my own self, what is being Indian. And I realized that this being Indian meant that I was going to struggle all my life because it's not the homogenized Indian, that every language, literature that I would want to read was different. And within that literature, there was a lot of differences coming together. And that was the opening of myself into trying to realize what cultural diversity is all about. Linguistic plurality is all about that each language, first and foremost, carries its own, I would say, all right, it's not a burden, but the load of cultural import would be within that language. But when I would be reading that in English, normally, because we didn't have, I would also be trying to read English, in English, some of those literatures of, say, Marathi or Malayalam or whichever other language. But I found that in English translations, a lot of it was kind of homogenized because the English is standardized. Today, we are talking about many Englishes, which need to be used in our translations, as you might bear me out. So I think this locating of your own English, I'm only talking right now, not only in translations into English, but if you want to know what Indian literatures are all about, that you need to actually know the nuances of your own mother tongue, which earlier on it used to be said, mother tongue interference. But I think that's a very positive thing that happens when your Gujarati gets into your English and gives an orientation of what country, in Gujarati there is. What is which land are you, kind of approaching within that, or identity within that language? So I'm still grappling with it because initially, right now, I'm the editor of Indian literature, which is a big challenge because there is a huge problem because the translations, people are beginning to translate, and I'm getting translations from not just the 24 standard languages, but from even languages like Bodo and Maithili, and it's very difficult for me to find out whether the translation is authentic or not. But one of the ways in which I kind of work out whether it's authentic somewhat or not is by realizing what kind of an English is used for translation. And when I see that I can feel the Gujarat in that translation, if it is from a Gujarati or whatever it is claiming to be a translation from, whichever language, I feel there's something to it. And believe me, when I'm looking at that translation and I feel that there is power in it, many times it's that there could be some incorrect usages. I don't care. I put somebody at work to editorially look at it so that there aren't mistakes or incorrect English should not be there. However, I do not sift out the idiomatic translation that is required, So I think the diversity lies in the realization of it And the diversity lies in the realization of the differences. And when we start realizing that, we also know when we go to, say, tribal or oral traditions, and then we see the transcription and translation, there are very big challenges. And it can take you a lifetime to understand what this diversity is all about. So I'm grappling with it. But I think in the larger context, I think all of us translators need to really keep thinking about it and finding ways, particularly in English, as to how do you translate the humor of, say, Allahabad, which is very different from the humor that is there in Banaras, right? So it's Hindi, to say the least. It's all Hindi. But within that Hindi, there are many Hindis also, right? Yeah.
Should we take questions now? I think we want this session to be mercifully brief. Yes. So,
I have one point to make, and I would like to ask my co-panelists
Yeah.
and also.
only problem is the audience might melt away. So,
No. Please bear with us. Just one last thing. Do you agree, writers, translators, academics here, that in the 80s and 90s, I would say the emergence of Indo-Anglian writers in the Indian literature scene, do you think that kind of democratized Indian literature to some extent? That many people were now had access, irrespective of the fact whether it was a Gujarati writing in English or a Bengali writing in English. But do you think that happened with a lot of this new generation coming up writing in English? Many writers came up at that time who started writing in English, especially our generation. Do you think that kind of democratized Indian literature and sort of exposed a lot of at least a large part of the English speaking new age Indians to literature of different kinds, which also included translations?
I think Mr. Swarup will speak for all of us, or you. No, no, me. You can't accuse me of being thoughtful at this moment. I think I'm very tired. I think it has worked both ways. It has also alienated a lot of people who write in regional languages from Indian writing in English, because I think Saikat was talking about this. When you write in English, you already enter into a particular mindset, elite mindset. So people thought that, many people say that they think and dream and feel in English. My students, some of them. And but what kind of dream they see is our nightmare. And many authors, some of them are really very good, very famous. They say something very ridiculous. When they're asked, why did you choose to write in English? They say, well, in a cute way, English chose me. So I was very happy when English was very busy doing something else. When Gitanjali Sri was writing, or Binod Shukla was writing, English was very busy doing household chores, or maybe doing something in Ukraine. Okay? So I think that way, I think it has demoralized a lot, because unless you get translated into English or you write in English, you thought that you can't enter. It's like the waiting room of history. I'm not talking about that. Until you write in English, you are still confined to, stuck in the waiting room of history. I think once Gitanjali Sri gets that Booker Prize, or Han Kang gets it, or whatever, I think we have now been crawling out of the waiting room of history. So I have a very ambivalent attitude towards. They should write, but English should be too busy, I think, so that other people can do other things. The English has unfortunately chosen many Indians for the wrong reasons. Has undone many. So yeah. So I think we'll take a few questions from the audience. Just before that, I say I think Mr. Swarup has given us the unifying metaphor, the bridge. And bridges are, I think, vulnerable. Always very vulnerable. In a war, bridges are fast blown. And every time for a civil engineer, every time a civil engineer gave us a dinner, we thought 3 bricks are falling from some bridge. That money came from, I think. So I think now let's take a few questions from the audience and end their misery as quickly as we can. Oh, my God. Heroic, I think. Anand? We're all grateful to you. One question. You have made our day.
Thank you. Now, beginning with the theme of the panel itself, one nation, many voices. That itself, how do we feel about it? That itself already frames our engagement in a particular way. Nation is not just one nation. Within that, whatever conversations I have had, I'm grateful to you. But along with that, these many voices also are part of a world context. Therefore, these Indian literatures, one and the many, how they are part of world literatures, the idea of a world literature that Goethe talked about, Tagore touched upon. So in contemporary literary landscape, what are the dynamics of world literature in many languages, whether it is Bodo or Maithili? So I request your reflection on that, or what kind of processes that in whichever language we write, it would also have a dimension of world literature.
Yeah, ultimately, I think we need to go engage with the world literature more and more. However, I think because politically we are supposed to be in India, it's just more political. But, like you do think in terms, I think it was Sujit Mukherjee who wrote that beautiful essay, and in which he talks about, diversity and all that. But then he says, well, there are some unifying factors like, you have these two big epics, for instance, Ramayana and Mahabharata. And then the counter argument also comes up, but wherever it goes, Ramayana, it becomes another kind of Ramayana, another narrative. So that speaks for the diversity also. So there are unifying factors. However, ultimately, if you talk in terms of some basic human say emotions or values or whatever humanity, from that point of view, I think that in world literature, and there are so many definitions of what is world literature, but in one context, it's certainly, you get to see that the more rooted the author is, the greater the transcendence into the universal in one sense, because it's very convincing then. The emotion or the feelings become very, very convincing. And that is what connects you to another, and then the other to the another yet. So there is a kind of a network of the basic unifying factor of some kind in terms of the entire world. So I don't know what else to say right now, but there could be a lot one can, because in today's context, world literature is being defined in a variety of ways.
I can only think of one novel. Amitav Ghosh's Gun Island, which is a novel that has environmental concerns as its primary theme. Much of the action takes place in Venice. Some of it takes place in California. The narrator is Bengali who lives in the US, who has grown up in Calcutta. The other elements of the novel include Bangladeshis who have traveled to Venice and are speaking in Bangla. They are migrants. One of the reasons they moved is the climate, but there are other factors as well. There are old legends from the Sundarban area, which are being given a world context. The person who explains all of this is an Italian scholar. So to me, this was a great example of world literature, where many streams that affect the entire planet seem to be coming together in a particular work, which is written by a man of Indian origin. He's an Indian still in every sense, but he himself lives and writes in Brooklyn. That to me is what truly diverse literature is about, I think, in a global context.
Certain issues are universal. Certain subjects, no, that's it.
Okay, so anyone? Oh my.
Yeah, here.
No. I'm not alarmed. I think you should look at the face of the audience.
Very briefly, it was touched upon that, role of literature, and that your work lives on. So this is, like it was like a solution to immortality. So as writers, the fact that when you're creating a work, it's going to live on, does this thing of legacy, does it inform your writing in any which way?
Frankly, maybe I have already switched off my mind, but maybe Mr. Swarup will.
Look, in answer to the previous question about world literature, I mean, what makes a book world literature? First of all, there is no such thing as a global novel. You cannot say, okay, I'm going to write a novel which is going to go global, and that's why I'm going to write it in such a way that it will have a global impact. No, it is always a local novel which becomes global. I mean, if you look at 100 Years of Solitude, there's not a single element which looks like, oh, it's a world thing, but the themes that it evokes, those themes, the fallibility of man, for instance, it was those themes that made it universal. When I was writing my novel Q&A, I had not a single expectation that it will be read by anybody outside India. Now it's in 47 translations because the theme was that of the underdog winning. And that's a universal theme that resonates all across the world. So that's the first point, that when you're writing, I think, yes, for us, for every writer, I think they do feel that the book that they have written will outlast them, in the sense that, a book will have probably a longer shelf life than a film has, in the sense, it comes and it goes, but books remain. But even that is changing now. I mean, as I mentioned in my previous session with Neha, that books have also become commodified now. Books are also seen as a commodity. They have lost their exalted status that they had at one point in time. So whether writers can still cling on to that exalted status that I'm writing for legacy, it is something that, my fifth generation after I have gone would be saying, your great, great, great grandfather wrote this and things like that. I don't know. Because, the transient culture in which we are living, where everything is just is a consumable and then it's discarded. Yes, I hope certain classics will live on. But whether we are even producing enough classics these days, I think that is also another question. Are we producing enough world classics now? We are not.
So I was just thinking, no, not just once. I think what is very interesting is I was just the other day thinking of, I was talking to Anvita Abbi, who is a very well-known linguist. And she's been working in Andaman and Nicobar Islands and using mythology, etc. One of the things that came to my mind as she was talking was, when you look at the tribal imagination and go to the tales which we now call folk tales, etc., whatever, you look at their stories and particularly myths of origin. Do you know that's such a unifying factor? Because whether it is Timbuktu or Jharkhand or Australia somewhere, many of these myths come together in the kind of tale that is being told about as far as the myth of origin is concerned. I've yet to verify it to a great extent, but she was talking about how she found certain myths to be the same with the indigenous people in New Mexico as she found in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So I'm wondering, is that the world literature that we're talking about? Maybe we should go tribal for that.
Unless there is a question. Any more questions? I hope not. But I thought you had disappeared. You always let us down.
This might be a bit late in the day, but I can't help bringing up the whole three-language policy debate. That's obviously still going on. And it sometimes seems to me that this whole idea of sort of getting a indigenous national language is a kind of an imitation of the British administration's use of English. Obviously, Achebe, I was thinking of what Achebe said in the African context, that, we didn't really need English. And even the English didn't want to spread English in Africa because they were basically selling Bibles in African languages. But they brought the concept of the nation. And once you introduce the concept of the nation, you need a language. So it was really the other way around. and I think India is not like Africa. Obviously, India had kingdoms and empires, but sometimes it seems to me that, of course, when colonialism, decolonization happens, certain colonial measures work, whether it's parliaments, railways, whatever. But in the language domain, I think it hasn't really worked. It has sort of worked, but obviously the resistance to Hindi that is coming from the southern states, I think, other parts. And I wonder, should we keep trying? Should we even keep trying, or are we just trying to reproduce a kind of a colonial dream of a unifying administrative language? Are there other ways of imagining Indian unity without a unifying language?
Yeah, he said the answer is in the question. It solves our problem. Most helpful participant.
Completely agree with you.
I think one more question.
Good evening. It's already too late. I'll keep it short. So in our past, we have had people like Periyar E.V. Ramaswamy, who were a really good proponent of their own Tamil languages, but at the same time wanted people to also learn English so that their idea could reach more number of people. In my times, if I say this one line in Hindi, मुझे पढ़ना पसंद है, the image that I get in my head are for course books. And if I just replicate it in English and I say I like to read, I get a more wider audience in my head itself. So has there been some kind of epistemological upbringing that things change, that whenever we think of reading, we think of English as a language and not the native literature that we have with us?
Maybe I'm sleepy. I don't understand your question. I also don't want to understand the learned resource person should, panelist should. It's a very difficult question, I think. I suspect it's a very complicated question, and
it's only mostly
can we
for
let it
those-
rest in peace for a
those who
while?
have, I think it's limited to those who have, who have studied the English language as a medium of instruction. It more relates to those people as readers for whom English has been the medium of instruction. They're more comfortable. Like as he said that, I think English. Somebody said, I think in English. So it's those people, for whom this applies. Not for everybody. Anybody who loves to read any kind of literature, he or she wouldn't like to limit themselves to just, English. Definitely not. But I do feel that's what I asked my very esteemed panelists, that do you think there has been some kind of a democratization with the coming of the Indo-Anglian writers? And they sort of said nothing of the sort. No, so maybe a larger readership has emerged, a larger common readership has emerged, for whom English has been their primary language as a medium of instruction. So they probably can, this applies to them. Not, definitely not the rest of the readers who still continue reading in their vernacular language.
The problem began when they stopped thinking in English and started dreaming in English. That's when the night there. As long as they think in English, we are very happy.
What do you think, Manju? Because
These are the people who dominate lit fests. But if you actually look at the literatures of the various languages of India outside of English, they're all thriving, doing very well, getting lots of writers, lots of readers. And English is quite irrelevant to those readers, quite frankly.
That's
Yeah.
why I think that question is very pertinent, which was posed here. About thinking of India as a nation and a westernized kind of, one nation kind of thing. I think we need to, I think a certain kind of federalism is what we require, and many
Bring those
languages.
staffs.
So I guess it's a very exciting show going on, but we should wind up, taking the time up. So maybe next time we'll plan for a longer session, maybe in the first session hours. So without wasting much, now I would like to invite the fans here. Ma'am, you can please come and do the honors, please. Give me one staff. सर थे ना क्वेश्चन पूछ के आते चले गए क्या Boss, sir, you can also come, please. Please come, na. Please come. I'm requesting you, please come. Please, ma'am.
You cannot begin a small business. Go back and sell those cars and organize another lit fest.
It's a very big honor. Thank you.
With the number of panelists, we can invite two. How many have you got so far? Yeah, you begin. Lovely. It's the best, last and the best.
Now I know why you were doing that.
Yes. Bring up the scarf.
Inshallah.
Thanks.
Sir, last request, please, everybody should come.
Okay. Oh, this is a pleasant beauty, you don't resent it. Sound right. Yeah, no biting.
Just a little bit that's it, so that it will be center.
Yeah.
Okay. A big round of applause actually. But a nice now, just everybody, if you want to have a photo, please, everybody can come and sit there, please. Please, last one. Last one. This kind of moment,